The same pattern repeats itself all over the planet. The appearance of unexplained, inexplicable, or miraculous healings that cause people afflicted with incurable diseases to unexpectedly, and beyond all doubt, recover. Healings that are a tangible reality that challenge the foundations of the most orthodox science. In this video, we will witness the astonishing medical miracles. There is a certain number of people whose healing, brought about either by their religious convictions, their inner strength, or pure coincidence or causality, escapes current human understanding of illnesses. There is also a specific group of religious healers who, in one way or another, utilize people's beliefs to perform what appears to be more of a spectacle, in many cases highly profitable, than one of the so-called miracles that are so often mentioned. They proclaim themselves healers by the grace of God, but deep down, their objectives are to profit from this rather than providing a service to the community. They hold highly spectacular gatherings where the word and contact with these individuals make an enraptured and undoubtedly very needy audience believe that a miracle worker is before them. But let's delve directly into this group of healings that current science cannot explain. Are there elements that increase the chances of healing? It seems that the answer to this question is yes. But this element is not just, as belief often goes, the fact that a higher power, whatever the entity may be, is capable of intervening, but it is possible that the power of the mind may interfere at some point in the inexorable evolution of the ailment. It's important to take into account that in so-called religious settings, a higher number of healings occur, either due to the gathering of a large number of people, or because these gatherings are controlled in a more or less direct manner. However, there are significant groups of people without specific religious convictions in which similar circumstances have occurred, and they have not attributed the remission of their illness to divine intervention. The existence of miracles directly contradicts current science, for which the presence of these miracles represents a significant obstacle to a more rational understanding. One of the pillars of science is the reproduction and repetition of the phenomenon under investigation. However, when these supposed facts are manifested, they only serve to generate significant controversy because they are subject to the controlled reiteration of what occurs, which forms the foundation of scientific knowledge. But what should we do when we cannot replicate or bring into a laboratory what is happening and is an inherent reality? The answer in most cases is clear. Denial is the key word for it. What we cannot explain does not exist. Such a statement only reflects the intransigence, ignorance, and fear of the unknown that characterize the so-called official scientists. It is no less true that there is a large group of these scientists with a much more open mind, inclined to understand and accept a reality that we are still unable to explain. These scientists, even though they cannot provide a plausible explanation for something that is repeatedly and frequently occurring to varying degrees, continue to gather data so that at some point in human history, we can provide a conclusive answer to what is happening and avoid falling into fearful denial of losing control or the seat of knowledge. In medicine, or rather, in the practice of medicine, we frequently encounter multiple events that escape our knowledge and rationality. Many times, they are small details that we have overlooked, and in other instances, they are facts that, even after reviewing them repeatedly, we are still unable to explain clearly. Those doctors who already have many years of work experience will have had some cases that have surely caught their attention, cases in which they do not know the reason why that patient who is in a state of significant or even critical condition has improved in a drastic manner. A clear example of this would be those patients who are in the ICU, in a coma state, for a more or less extended period of time, when, in a completely unexplained manner, they recover and regain a level of consciousness like before, in many cases without appreciable sequelae, against the most judicious medical prognosis and diagnosis. Let's talk about the case of Sam Hemming, a 22-year-old girl who, after a severe traffic accident, fell into a coma. After the corresponding assessment, hospital specialists determined the person's non-viability, so they were about to disconnect her from all the equipment keeping her alive. However, their surprise was immense when, moments before carrying out the disconnection, the patient moved a toe and, against all odds, woke up. She is currently recovering from all her sequelae. Despite all the diagnostic and prognostic means available in the hospital, they failed in a staggering manner, because if that person had been disconnected from the vital support needed at that moment, they would have inevitably died. What could we talk about here? Did the diagnosis fail? A medical miracle? It's important to understand that there are still many medical conditions that medicine has not fully comprehended. Even though hospitals have protocols for the diagnosis and treatment of patients, it must be said that many times these protocols may fail, not due to malpractice, but because there is still an unknown element. For the scientific and medical definition, it is very difficult to comprehend the existence of a miracle because it seems like we are in a religious paradigm. Perhaps it would be more specific to say that there are unexplained healings, as many healthcare professionals have been witnesses, often passively, to healings that defy our understanding of traditional medicine. Clearly, everyone is free to have their own beliefs, but we are not talking about belief here. We are talking about tangible evidence, unexplained healings, and pathological processes that we don't know why they occur. Medicine and scientific knowledge continue to advance in parallel with human evolution, but sometimes we may think that knowledge has reached its final limit. This is a grave mistake because one only needs to look at the evolution of knowledge and medicine in the last century to realize how the scientific mindset has changed during this time. However, in the past 20 years, there has been an even more significant shift towards openness to other fields of medicine that were previously considered completely taboo. Interestingly, we speak of medical miracles when healing occurs, but what could we say when patients exhibit a much slower and more complicated recovery than expected? Could we call these cases miraculous punishments? These are misunderstandings of human states that we know as little about as in ancient times. Before we knew about bacteria and viruses, nothing was known about them, and many of the processes that occurred were considered magical. Furthermore, the terrible plague of the Black Death that ravaged the planet in the 14th century was attributed to multiple factors, such as the presence of black cats, curses, witches, but never to its primary culprit, which was Yersinia pestis, carried by rats. They did the opposite of what would be done today. They allowed such a deadly plague to spread, and they even virtually annihilated the natural enemy of these germ-carrying rats. There is a very important aphorism that says faith moves mountains, and it is true that positive thinking has been proven to increase our immune system's ability to deal with various diseases. It cannot be said, however, that any disease can be cured simply by believing it will be cured. Or maybe it can. An ear, nose, and throat specialist had the opportunity to witness a very interesting case regarding this. It involved a middle-aged man with a mid-cervical tumor that had been biopsied, resulting in a primary malignant tumor diagnosis, for which the recommended treatment was surgical removal. The morning when the events occurred, the surgical removal had been performed on him, and they had successfully removed the tumor entirely. However, a complication had arisen, consisting of a hematoma hemorrhage, which was compressing the larynx, causing an obstruction of the upper airway and secondary asphyxiation of the patient. Through an optical fiber inserted through the nose, it was observed that the larynx had narrowed significantly, so the only possible action was to perform a tracheostomy to allow him to breathe without problems. Following this intervention, there was an immediate improvement in the patient's condition. None of this may seem astonishing, but in the days that followed, the patient mentioned that he was convinced that the previously diagnosed tumor had disappeared and that what had been removed did not contain a tumor. As it happens in many patients, and as psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross already pointed out, denial may perhaps be the first defense mechanism that the human being has when facing a condition that can be lethal. This caught the doctor's attention a lot, and he decided to follow the case with special interest. When the pathological anatomy arrived, which is the result of the analysis of the piece that had been extracted, and whose previous diagnosis had been a malignant tumor, it showed nothing more than a non-specific inflammation, but with no trace of a malignant tumor. Clearly, the first thing one thinks is that there might have been an error. However, the doctor personally had the opportunity to review the surgical sample from before the operation, where tumor cells could be clearly seen, and the post-surgical specimen, where there was no trace of a tumor in the incisions that were made. Faced with this evidence, and depending on the paradigm we are in, we can clearly speak of a miracle of the power of the mind or the body to eliminate tumors. But the truth is that we don't have an answer for what happened in this case. Clearly, for the patient, it was an immense joy, but what deeply struck me was the fact that he had the conviction that he had somehow been able to eliminate the tumor that could have ended his life, and that despite the complications that arose, the ending had a happy outcome. After several conversations with this person, the doctor was able to confirm that there was no religious interest in their beliefs, but rather they wanted to attribute it to a mental power, to a certain magical characteristic that they were confident they could incorporate. So one must ask a question: can a person combat such serious injuries with the sheer power of their mind alone? The answer is that we don't know for sure, although various studies do show that a positive attitude can influence the final outcome of the illness, both in terms of healing and in extending the person's quality of life. Conversely, a negative attitude can lead to a more negative outcome. In fact, in many oncology centers, the first treatment they recommend to the patient, regardless of the tumor type, is to take an antidepressant. Not because this person may develop a reactive depression to their illness, but because it has been shown that a positive attitude improves the results. As a final reflection, it remains to be said that, although science may perhaps be afraid of the presence of miracles or unexplained healings, as it is very difficult to acknowledge that there are still many medical cases that defy the so-called natural laws of human beings, and therefore, we should become aware that we do not know many more things than we believe we know. As the great Descartes said, "I would give all that I know for all that I do not know." We should be humble and acknowledge that we still ignore a great many things. Thank you for joining us in this video. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. See you in the next one.